Hello, welcome to Amalion. Today I would like to talk about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Due to such frequent face-to-face meetings, we have very little written correspondences between them. Therefore, this means that we have very little amount of sources of their conversations, as they were seldom written down in letters. However, we do have some information, and in this video I just wanted to talk about one particular moment, which is considered one of the most important in relation to the friendship that they shared together, and which proved especially impactful to C.S. Lewis's spiritual beliefs. The moment contains a whole lot of what Tolkien's philosophical views were toward mythos and storytelling. So I find it very interesting. And it was also a very endearing and wholesome moment between them. After the death of his friends Geoffrey Bache Smith and Rob Quilter Gilson, which resulted in the closing of the TCBS, Tolkien was left with, we could say, a hole in his heart. A hole that was eventually refilled with fellowship. On the 11th of May, 1926, Tolkien attended a faculty meeting at Merton College. It was at this meeting that he first met C.S. Lewis. Tolkien would soon find in C.S. Lewis a rediscovery of the similar sentiment to that which he received from the TCBS, a recovered sense of like-minded kinship from his youth. Tolkien certainly valued his newfound gift of friendship, and from C.S. Lewis he experienced that nostalgic sense of love again. The joy of friendship was mutually felt between both men, chiefly because of their shared opinions about fairy storytelling and the encouragement they offered one another in their writings. In the year of 1926, at which time Tolkien was in about his 6th year working at Leeds University as professor of English language, he created his own club called the Kolbitars, or in English, the Kolbitars. Its name means those who lounge so close to the fire in winter that they bite the coal. So it's kind of a sort of philological joke associated with cold weather. The Kolbitars, it was an informal reading club in which the members read the Icelandic sagas and the Edda in its original language. By May of 1927, Tolkien invited C.S. Lewis to join the club. He was interested in the invitation, and they were soon meeting regularly, talking far into the night. And after one of these particular meetings, and it can be assumed that this happened more than once, Tolkien went back to Lewis's college rooms with him, where they talked for hours about Norse mythology. These old northern texts, they were significant influences for both their imaginative writings, both C.S. Lewis's and Tolkien's imaginative writings. And these conversations that they shared with one another doubtless proved essential in strengthening their storytelling abilities. One of these conversations in particular even went as far as contributing to Lewis's eventual conversion to Christianity. The conversation I refer to occurred on the night of Saturday, the 19th of September, 1931. It strongly impacted the mutual bond shared between both he and Tolkien. Indeed, it proved a turning point in Lewis's life. That night, they went walking together beneath the stars along Addison's Walk, talking about myth and its purpose. At that time in his life, Lewis believed in God, but he was having trouble understanding the meaning of the crucifixion and the resurrection. And he hadn't quite figured out the theological understanding behind it in relation to Christianity. So he was a skeptic. He was someone who believed in something, but who was examining his beliefs and was delving deeper into what he already believed in, because he had questions and he wasn't completely firmly rooted in his understanding of that which he believed in. And though there is a proper way to learn about Christ's crucifixion and the resurrection, Tolkien told him that he was making an unnecessary demand. So what does that mean? Okay, so in pagan religion, C.S. Lewis found the concept of resurrections very moving and inspirational. So Tolkien was trying to convey to him that if he If he was so moved by pagan resurrection stories, why couldn't he also appreciate it in the story of the real resurrection, the one which actually happened, the one that really occurred? But then C.S. Lewis responded with, "But myths are lies, even though lies breathed through silver." And then Tolkien said, "No, they're not." Then he went on to describe how a person can look at a tree and choose to call it a tree, but it wasn't called tree until they gave it that name. In other words, by naming things and describing them, you are inventing your own terms about them. Therefore, just as speech is invention about objects and ideas, then myth is invention about truth. What makes the myth true is that its meaning conveys the truth. Then C.S. Lewis responded with, "You mean that the story of Christ is simply a true myth? A myth that works on us in the same way as the others, but a myth that really happened? In that case, I begin to understand." Of course, this doesn't completely solidify nor explain in full the doctrines or the creed of Christianity, but it did at least allow C.S. Lewis to see Christianity in a new light, which eventually led him to his full conversion. This insight completely changed C.S. Lewis's perspective, opening his eyes up to an entirely new way of looking at the relationship between myth and the Christian God. To embellish further on what Tolkien said that night, I'll say this. Many have claimed that the Gospels are full of lies, containing stories that cannot be proven true. Whether this is the case or not, it doesn't really matter, for they concern only the truth. A story's meaning, which conveys a certain hidden truth about reality, it might be the most effectively articulated with the literary mode of myth. Therefore, the result can very well be that of a story which never truly occurred, but which produces a real, living truth from its telling. This is the purpose of mythos, and thus the so-called lies of the gospel are actually true stories. One may ask, what is the most successful fairy story? The answer, if you were to ask Tolkien, which we know from his essay on fairy stories, his answer would be the story of Christ, the resurrection. There's a reason why the story has proven to withstand the tests of time and impacted numberless lives. Contained in it is the most despairing event that has ever happened to one person. Yet the story ends with not a catastrophe, but a sudden turn. Christ rises again. This is precisely why successful fairy stories that contain what Tolkien called a Eucatastrophe are valued and treasured, for they become an echo or distant reverberation from, we could say, the first fairy tale, or the one true song, the resurrection, the greatest tale ever told. Through myth, we see or we catch a glimpse of God. Myth does not convey an irrelevant lie, but a divine truth. For all myths are a drop of water from the one true divine fountain, gushing forth unceasingly. To be Christian is to prepare for death, for life that comes after life. One is preparing themselves for paradise. Now, where, in the Christian sense, and found countless times in ancient myth, is paradise found? It's elsewhere. Beyond. It is outside of ourselves and beyond the primary world in which we live. This is why successful fairy stories take place in a secondary world. We, as sub-creator, God being the primary creator, we can create our own world in which resides our deepest desire, paradise, or the world as it was before the fall of man. Tolkien and Lewis strove to manifest in their own fictional writings just such a beauty and truth within Narnia and Arda. So that is, in essence, what Tolkien attempted to convey to Lewis that night. It opened his eyes to the Christian faith, offering him a new perspective with which to consider the Christian doctrines. One of these new perspectives that awoke in his mind was the relation between fairy tales and the Christian paradise, as Tolkien so often meditated upon. C.S. Lewis often used the term longing. The longing for joy, for eternity, Lewis believed was the reason why the storyteller desired to create fantasy in the first place, which is also what Tolkien believed. In Fairy, man finds a hint of heaven. Creating another world is the fulfillment of such imaginative longing, which only occurs because we desire true joy. Lewis believed that joy was a hinted, a sample, taste of ultimate reality, or heaven, or of what our world could have been had it not endured the fall of man, like I said before. Within story, one hopes to find consolation and joy. It was suggested by C.S. Lewis in his book, The Weight of Glory, that mankind is in search for not mere happiness, but a joy which they cannot put into words. An eternal joy that is unfathomable to describe with words. And so C.S. Lewis also says in his book, perhaps this is why man has rationalized this joy with the mysterious beauty of nature fused with the flesh. So, for example, sentient trees, sentient animals, nymphs, elemental spirits, and that sort of thing. And he says, people, over the centuries, having beheld God's creation and having become so enamored by it, desiring to be a part of its beauty, or completely unified with the one who created all this beauty around us, turned it into their own man-made pagan beliefs, these people who desired to be a part of it so completely that they mistook it for their own psychological understandings or their own worldly or temporal passionate understandings, and turned it into their own, like I said, man-made beliefs, which are pagan, thus resulting in nature gods, which we can read about in many mythological stories across multiple cultures. In Tolkien, C.S. Lewis found a guide who saved him from the frivolity of materialism and led him to the path on which he discovered the pursuit of true joy, God's creation. In C.S. Lewis, Tolkien found a sense of that sweet young friendship he once enjoyed with the TCBS, a fellowship torn from him, rediscovered again in Lewis, upon whose encouragement he so heavily relied and generously received.